The call came at 7:14 in the morning. I remember because I was still in my housecoat, standing at the kitchen window watching the snow come down over the backyard, holding a cup of tea I hadn't touched yet. My daughter's name lit up the screen and I smiled before I even answered. I always smiled when she called, Mom. Her voice was flat, not flat like tired, flat like rehearsed. I need to tell you something, and I need you to just listen. I set the cup down. Derek and I have been dealing with some financial stress. We didn't want to worry you, but things got bad faster than we expected, and we needed to act quickly. A pause. We used your account, the joint one, the one Dad and I were both on after he passed. We didn't have time to ask. We needed the money for the investment before the window closed. I stood very still. How much? I said. Another pause. Longer this time. $84,000. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. $84,000. That was 22 years of careful savings. That was selling the car and living on my pension. That was the money I had earmarked to fix the foundation on this house, the one my late husband and I bought in 1991, the one I had planned to leave to her one day. Mom, say something. I have to go, I said, and I hung up. I stood at that window for a long time after. The snow kept falling, quiet and indifferent, covering the garden my husband had planted the summer before he got sick. I thought about what he would have said. He was a measured man, my husband, an accountant for 31 years. He would have sat down first. He would have said, let's look at the actual numbers before we do anything else. So I sat down, and I looked at the numbers. The joint account, the one I had kept open out of sentiment, because his name was still on it, because I couldn't bear to remove it, had been almost entirely emptied. There was $11.42 left. $11. I stared at that number on my laptop screen until my vision blurred. I want to be clear about something. My daughter, Tanya, is 41 years old. She went to university in Halifax on a scholarship and a loan I helped her pay back. I was there when she married her husband, Derek, 12 years ago in a small ceremony at a vineyard outside of Niagara-on-the-Lake. I wore a pale blue dress, and I cried when she walked down the aisle, because she looked so much like my sister did at that age, and because I was so certain she had made a good choice. I was not certain anymore. Derek had always made me uneasy in the way that very charming people sometimes do. He had an answer for everything. He knew about wine and politics and which restaurants were worth the drive, and he laughed at exactly the right moments in every conversation. My husband used to say, I don't know what it is, but that man never seems to be fully present. I had told him he was being uncharitable. I had defended Derek for 12 years. Now I thought about my husband, and I thought, he was right. He was right about so many things he never got to finish saying. I called my bank that same morning. The representative I spoke with, a patient young man whose name I've already forgotten, walked me through what had happened. Because my husband's name was still on the account and had never been formally removed following his death, and because Tanya was listed as a secondary account holder for emergencies, I had added her after my husband's diagnosis. In case I couldn't manage things myself, Derek had convinced her that the access was legal, that they had every right. Is there anything we can do? I asked. There was a long pause on his end. He said he'd escalate it to the fraud department and that I should file a police report. A police report? About my daughter. I sat in my car in the driveway for 40 minutes before I went back inside. Tanya called 4 more times that day. I let them all go to voicemail. That evening I listened to all 4 messages in order. The first was apologetic. The second was explanatory, something about a real estate development opportunity in Mississauga, a guaranteed return. They'd been trying to protect me from the risk. The third was frustrated. The fourth was angry. In the fourth one, she said, Mom, you're being dramatic. This is a family matter. We'll pay you back. Stop making this into something it isn't. I deleted all 4. I have a friend named Paulette who I've known since we were teachers together at the same elementary school in Burlington. She retired the same year I did. She's blunt in the way that only good friends can be blunt. And she was the first person I told. I drove to her house that evening because I didn't trust myself to say the words over the phone without crying, and I didn't want to cry in my kitchen alone. I sat at her kitchen table and I told her everything. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she poured two small glasses of rye and pushed one across the table to me and said, "Elaine, you have to report it." Elaine, that's me. 64 years old, retired schoolteacher, widow, mother of one. She's my daughter, I said. I know, said Paulette, and she stole $84,000 from a grieving widow who trusted her enough to put her name on an account. Those two things are both true at the same time. I drank the rye. I hadn't had rye in years. My husband used to drink it. What does Derek do? Paulette asked. She'd met him 3 or 4 times at most. She had never warmed to him either. He calls himself a financial consultant, I said. Independent. He's always between big deals. Paulette made a sound with her mouth. Not quite a word. Just a sound that contained everything she thought about that. The next morning I called a lawyer. Not the one my husband and I had used for the house. He'd retired years ago. I called a woman named Sandra who had been recommended to me by our neighbor's son, who was a Crown attorney in Hamilton. She saw me 2 days later at her office on Lock Street. Small office, second floor above a dry cleaner, nothing fancy. She was somewhere in her late 50s, no-nonsense haircut, reed glasses pushed up on her forehead. She looked at everything I had brought, the account records, the withdrawal history, the timeline I had written out by hand, because I am still a person who writes things by hand. She asked me several questions. Had I ever given verbal permission for this withdrawal? No. Had I ever signed anything authorizing Derek to act on my behalf? No. Was Tanya aware that the account was still in her father's name at the time of the withdrawal? She would have known yes, because she knew I hadn't been able to bring myself to remove his name. Sandra took off her glasses and set them on the desk. Here's the situation, she said. Because the account was jointly held and your daughter had legitimate access, this is complicated. But the complication works in your favor in some ways, because the joint access was granted for emergency purposes, not investment purposes. There's a reasonable argument to be made for breach of fiduciary duty, and depending on what Derek's involvement looks like, potentially fraud. My son-in-law orchestrated this, I said. My daughter is not a stupid woman, but she has spent 12 years listening to that man. Sandra nodded slowly. That happens, she said. It doesn't eliminate her responsibility, but it does affect the shape of this. I told her to proceed. I want to stop here for a moment and tell you something about the weeks that followed, because they were not simple, and I think if I skip over them, it becomes the kind of story where things happen too neatly. They weren't neat. My daughter stopped calling after about 10 days. I don't know what that means, whether she was ashamed, or whether Derek had told her to stop, or whether she was angry enough to cut me off first. I spent a lot of time not knowing that, and not knowing was its own particular kind of pain. There were nights I sat in my living room with the television on, not watching it, just needing the sound of voices, and thought about her as a 7-year-old who had come down with a bad flu and wanted to sleep in our bed between me and her father. The way she had fit there like she was the missing piece of us. I also need to tell you about the letter. About 3 weeks after I filed the police report, I received a handwritten letter in the mail. The return address was a town north of Barrie, a small place I'd never had reason to visit. The handwriting was small and careful, the kind that belonged to someone who had been taught penmanship properly. Older than me, probably. It was from a woman named Rosemary. She explained that she had been following the story, not my story, she didn't know me, but a story she'd seen reported in a local news brief about a financial dispute involving an elderly woman's estate account. She wasn't certain it was the same situation, but she had seen Derek's name. She had seen his name before. She had a daughter too. 10 years earlier, her daughter had married a man who called himself a financial consultant, independent, always between big deals. His name then had been listed differently, a middle name used as a first, she suspected, but the description Rosemary had read matched what she remembered. Her daughter's marriage had ended after he had moved a significant portion of her savings into a numbered company he controlled. He had disappeared. The daughter had not recovered financially for years. Rosemary wasn't sure if this helped me. She said she was sorry. She said she had spent a long time wishing she had done something sooner, when she'd first had the feeling in her gut that something was wrong about him. I read that letter 4 times. Then I forwarded a copy to Sandra. Things moved differently after that. Sandra connected with the fraud division of the Ontario Provincial Police. What they found over the next several weeks was not simple, and it was not small. Derek had incorporated 3 numbered companies over the past 6 years. 2 of them were dormant shells. The third had received a large transfer from my account and several smaller transfers from other sources that investigators were still tracing. He had done this before, as Rosemary had said, not just once, but 3 times in different provinces, always with a slightly different name configuration, always attached to a woman whose access to someone else's money made him useful. My daughter had not known all of this. I believe that. I believe it because when she was finally interviewed by investigators and she found out the full shape of what he was, not just what he'd done to me, but what he'd done before, who he had been before she met him. She called me from a payphone outside the police station in Oakville. She had left her cell phone in the car. She said she didn't want the call to be traceable, and then she caught herself saying that and started to cry. I hadn't heard my daughter cry like that since her father's funeral. I didn't know, she said. I knew it was wrong what we did to you. I knew it was wrong, and I told myself you'd be okay, that we'd pay you back, that it was temporary. I told myself that until I believed it. Her voice broke. But I didn't know he was. I didn't know there were other people. I didn't know who I was living with. I didn't say anything for a moment. Where are you staying? I asked. I'm at a hotel. I left the house this morning. I can't go back. Are you safe? Yes. I think he's already gone. The investigators said he may have left the province. He had. Derek was apprehended 6 days later at the border crossing near Windsor, attempting to leave the country with a bag that contained, among other things, a passport in a different name. Tanya came to stay with me for 2 weeks in February. She slept in her old room, the one that still had the hook on the back of the door where she used to hang her backpack when she came home from school. We didn't talk much at first. We watched a lot of television in the evenings, the kind of thing neither of us would have chosen on our own. But that was easy to sit through together. She made soup. I had forgotten she knew how to make soup. Her grandmother had taught her, my mother, years before she passed. There were hard conversations. There had to be. She had known on some level that what they did was wrong. She had chosen to follow Derek's framing of it because she loved him, and because she was afraid, and because he was very, very good at making wrong things sound reasonable. None of that excused it. We both knew that. I'm not asking you to forgive me right now, she said one night. We were sitting at the kitchen table, same table where I'd read the bank statement that morning in January. I'm not even sure you should. I just need you to know that I know what I did. I looked at her for a long time. Your father would have said that knowing what you did is only the beginning, I said. The rest of it is what comes after. She nodded. She understood. The legal process was long. It always is. Derek was charged in Ontario, and the investigation extended to activities in British Columbia and Quebec. My funds were partially recoverable through the assets seized from the numbered company. Not all of it, not 84,000, but a significant portion. Sandra was good at her job. I will say that clearly. Tanya cooperated fully with investigators. That cooperation, and the fact that she had no prior record, and the fact that her own understanding of what she participated in was genuinely limited, these things were weighed accordingly. She was not without consequences. But she was not Derek. The foundation of the house, the one I had been saving to repair, got fixed last September. I hired a contractor my neighbor recommended, a sturdy, quiet man who finished the job 4 days ahead of schedule. Standing in the basement afterward, looking at the new concrete, I thought about my husband. I thought about how he had worried about that foundation for years and never quite got around to fixing it. I thought about how strange it is that some things only get resolved after a great deal of breaking first. My daughter calls me every Sunday now, sometimes twice. She has moved back to the Hamilton area and started over. New job, new apartment, a small balcony where she's trying to grow herbs, which she sends me photos of with captions like the basil is somehow still alive. She is rebuilding. I am watching her do it. Last month, I sat down and wrote a letter back to Rosemary. It took me 3 drafts. I told her what had happened, the parts that were no longer confidential, and I thanked her for writing to me. I told her that her letter had changed the shape of everything. I told her I hoped her daughter was doing better. I told her that I hoped she herself was all right, because it takes something out of you, carrying that kind of knowledge for that long alone. She wrote back within the week. Her handwriting was the same, small and careful. She said her daughter was doing well now, remarried, living in Nova Scotia. She said she was glad she had sent the letter. She said it had taken her a long time to stop feeling like there was something she should have done sooner. I understand that feeling. I carried it too for a while. The sense that I should have seen something, should have trusted, that unease I felt and never quite voiced. But I have come to believe that most of us are not naive so much as we are hopeful. We hope the people we love are who we think they are. Sometimes we're wrong. That isn't our fault. What we do once we know, that's the part that matters. I turned 65 in March. Paulette took me to dinner at a restaurant in Dundance, the kind with white tablecloths and bread that comes out warm, and we talked for 3 hours about nothing and everything, and drank a bottle of wine that was better than anything I'd had in years. She raised her glass and said, "To being harder to fool next time." I laughed, actually laughed, the kind that comes up from somewhere real. "To being harder to fool," I said, and I meant it. There's a moment I keep coming back to. Not the phone call, not the bank statement, not even the letter from Rosemary. It's the image of Tanya sitting at my kitchen table, the same table where I first read those numbers, making soup from a recipe her grandmother taught her. She didn't know I was watching from the doorway. She was just standing there, quiet, stirring. That image tells me something I couldn't have put into words in January. It tells me that people are not only what they do at their worst, and it also tells me that what we do at our worst has real consequences, ones that don't disappear simply because we feel bad about them afterward. Both things are true. They have to be. I think about Derek sometimes, not with anger anymore, that's mostly gone, but with something closer to bewilderment. He was a man who chose, deliberately and repeatedly, to take from people who trusted him. He had the intelligence to construct elaborate explanations, to make wrong things sound reasonable, to move money through numbered companies in 3 provinces without getting caught for years. That kind of intelligence is real. But intelligence without any moral foundation isn't wisdom. It's just a more sophisticated way of causing harm, and the cause always eventually produces the effect. The border crossing near Windsor, the passport with a different name. That's where that road ends. Tanya had intelligence too. She still does. But for 12 years she used it to rationalize rather than to examine. I understand how that happens. When we love someone, we bend our judgment toward them. We want the story we're living to be a good one, so we edit out the parts that don't fit. That isn't stupidity. It's something more human than that, and more dangerous. The clearest thinking I ever did in my life came in the hardest moments. When I sat down with the actual numbers instead of running from them. When I called a lawyer instead of waiting to see if things would resolve themselves. when I read Rosemary's letter 4 times instead of once. What got me through wasn't toughness in the dramatic sense. It was something quieter than that. The willingness to keep going even when the next step was the last thing I wanted to take. Filing a police report about your own daughter is not a thing you do easily. Sitting across from a lawyer and laying out what happened is not easy. Neither is waiting. Neither is the particular silence of not knowing whether your child will come back to you. But you do the next right thing anyway, even when your hands are shaking. That's the only kind of strength that actually holds. I turned 65 in March. I'm not the same woman I was the January before that. I'm less naive, yes, but I don't think I'm harder. I hope I'm not harder. I want to stay the kind of person who smiles when my daughter's name appears on my phone. I just want to do it with my eyes open now. Rosemary wrote back. Her daughter is living well in Nova Scotia. There are good endings inside the hard ones, if you're willing to do what it takes to find them.